because it is extraordinarily rich. I find I got a major healing in reading this week. So welcome to High Plains. We're beginning chapter 12. And this is titled The Holy Spirit's Curriculum. Oh, well, we're just getting started here and with the Holy Spirit's curriculum. And we're tonight reading the very first section here, the judgment of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit judges with love and mercy. So it's the right use of judgment. This is not in any way have negative connotations. This is to be, matter of fact, here's the secret, folks. We thought we were to be judged. A Course in Miracles would have you transfer the function of judgment into the hands of the Holy Spirit. And now you're free of having to judge. And that is freedom. Matter of fact, the Course would say that's the only way to freedom is to let the Holy Spirit be the one to do the judging. I had a summary. We're going to skip that and we'll get right into the reading. Thank you, Brother David, for reading tonight.
You have been told not to make error real. And the way to do this is very simple. If you want to believe in error, you would have to make it real because it is not true. But truth is real in its own right. And to believe in truth, you do not have to do anything. Understand that you do not respond to anything directly, but to your interpretation of it. Your interpretation thus becomes the justification for the response. That is why analyzing the motives of others is hazardous to you. If you decide that someone is really trying to attack you or desert you or enslave you, you will respond as if he had actually done so, having made his error real to you. To interpret error is to give it power. And having done this, you will overlook truth.
So there are a couple of sub-themes that we'll repeat tonight, and we make sure that we identify them right from the beginning. There's actually in illusions, and having your mind grab hold of an illusion is actually two steps. First of all, you see it, and then you believe it to be real. That's where we really get hold. Seeing the illusion would be like just watching the fish swim by without grabbing onto it. But believing it to be real and meaningful then attaches your mind to that illusion. And so it's the mistake of making it real and and once you make it real, you've given power to it, and now you're hooked by it. So how do we unwind that so that that happens less and less, and eventually we learn that it happens not at all? Well, it has to do, first of all, with allowing our mind to fall into the trap of analyzing others' motives. We've all done this. So you've experienced this yourself, although you may not have labeled it this way. And that is someone else does something that you don't understand. And then you think through with your own mind, why did they do that? And then ascribe to them a reason. This is all done without talking to them at all. This is done in your own mind. And so now you've interpreted their motivation. This is an ego trap because the ego is motivated to assign blame. somewhere. The reason why the ego analyzes is it wants to determine who's to blame here, and thereby, since if we get hooked into analyzing, then we are actually participating in the blame game. So analyzing the motives of others is hazardous to you. So first we want to recognize the error, then we can move on to the way to heal that error, which, as you can guess, the Holy Spirit has the answer to that. David, you had a comment?
Yeah, you know, this really jumped out at me. Not only analyzing the motives of others based on their behavior or their what they say, but analyzing the motives of others just by your own mind completely. We make up think, oh, I know what you're thinking. You know, we know that there are no secret thoughts, there are no private thoughts, but the ego will analyze the quote private thoughts of somebody else in a much different way than the Holy Spirit analyzes those quote private thoughts. And how many times have you make up a story about what somebody is thinking about you or your situation, and it's totally without truth?
Yeah. So I think I've done that several times, many times, countless times.
Who hasn't?
So yeah, so it's a mental reaction, a mental practice that we must learn to stop. Set a boundary. If you see your mind doing that, stop doing that. Know that it's hazardous to your well-being to analyze the motives of others. You are participating in the beginning of a form of attacking the Son of God. So we must have a boundary around our minds. And we're learning to develop that. It's not saying we're well practiced in this, but this is where we begin learning to do that.
The analysis of ego motivation is very complicated, very obscuring, and never without your own ego involvement. The whole process represents a clear-cut attempt to demonstrate your own ability to understand what you perceive. This is shown by the fact that you react to your interpretations as if they were correct. You may then control your reactions behaviorally, but not emotionally. This would obviously be a split or an attack on the integrity of your mind, pitting one level within it against another.
Oh my, now we're really in a split here. So the real issue here is interpreting what's going on in the mind of others and believing your interpretations. As I said a moment ago, your interpretation becomes your justification for how you respond to them. And so this happens all the time in life. And so we're identifying a form of a symptom of mental illness, which is now that I've made an interpretation and that I act as if my interpretation is correct, then what happens? Well, one of two things. Either I can project all that upset, that my grievance, outward in my behaviors and in my language towards the other person, or I can do what it says here. I'm very good at this. I'll control my behavior on the outside, but emotionally, I'm trapped by the grievance I have. Do you get that? This is illustrated many times in movies where someone comes over to talk and they're very pleasant in front of them. And when they walk away, the person, then the real emotional attitude comes out, and you see that that was all fake. So that splits us between the way we're acting and the way we're feeling. And this split is an attack upon the integrity of your own mind. You're splitting your mind. Susie?
Yeah, it says somewhere in the text over and over again, obviously, that without correction, it doesn't mean anything. You know, if I see it on the outside, like when you said that, that just really, hit me. If I act a certain way on the outside, but I still feel it on the inside, I'm not being relieved. I'm not at peace. And it reminded me, for all those 12 steppers that I know are out there, is like, it's like white knuckling it, right? Like we're trying to act like we're okay, but inside we're really not, which is why I always say I have to bring it all to the Holy Spirit for correction.
Right. Yes, thank you. Sandra?
Yeah, and I'll mention it again. That's why after I bring it to the Holy Spirit and have trust and faith in my relationship with the Holy Spirit that I'll be guided, then I got to go do self-care and self-love. That's precisely why.
Right. Okay, so we'll go on here.
There is but one interpretation of motivation that makes any sense. And because it is the Holy Spirit's judgment, it requires no effort at all on your part. Every loving thought is true. Everything else is an appeal for healing and help, regardless of the form it takes. Can anyone be justified in responding with anger to a brother's plea for help? No response can be appropriate except the willingness to give it to him. For this and only this is what he is asking for. Offer him anything else, and you are assuming the right to attack his reality by interpreting it as you see fit. Perhaps the danger of this to your own mind is not yet fully apparent. If you believe that an appeal for help is something else, you will react to something else. Your response will therefore be inappropriate to reality as it is, but not to your perception of it.
So many times it says course is really very simple. And here's a beautiful example of it. In any interaction with another person, when it comes down to what is their intention, there is but one interpretation that the Holy Spirit can endorse, and only one. So this simplifies things, and the way we say it can be, we can rearrange the words, but here it's beautifully said. Every loving thought is true, and then the only other possibility is that the person is appealing for healing and help, whatever form it may take. They really are calling for help. They've lost a sense of their own self, their own goodness, and they're asking for help, perhaps in a very radical way, in a form that may be very extreme, but always in the Holy Spirit's mind, there is only these two choices, that they are offering love or asking for love. And so now we've simplified the whole of human relationships down to one simple formula. The person is either offering love, which you can probably pick up on pretty easily, because at some level it feels very easy to be with someone that's offering love and help and kindness, or else they're deeply in need of it and asking for it. So we've simplified, and by the way, this works because many times in life, we will have encounters that we simply cannot explain or understand what was the other person thinking. And now we have an answer. They were calling for love. They were calling for love. And because I was there, they were indirectly appealing to me for help. Wow, what a powerful tool. Regardless of the form that appeal for help may take, Holy Spirit views it as a cry for love. This lesson alone would be where, if you were to go to a counselor or some motivational seminar, this would be worth thousands of dollars just to understand. Stop trying to analyze what were they thinking. That's an ego bait. Let me, as it says right here, if you analyze what they were thinking, you are assuming the right to attack their reality by interpreting it as you see fit. That is the answer to what were they thinking, that you are assuming your own answers are appropriate. And so the Course says, no, stop that, and instead adopt the Holy Spirit's judgment, which is far simpler and makes it it relieves, going back to original point, by adopting this guidance, it absolves you of having to judge others and transfers that over to the Holy Spirit, who has already decided people are either asking for love or offering love. She's already made that judgment. You're just joining with her in that judgment. Loving judgment. Susie?
Yeah, I just wanted to share quickly that this course is worth, like you said, millions of dollars that you would spend on therapy, because and it takes time. It took me a long time, and it gets better and better and better. But if somebody would, like, quote unquote, say something or flip out or offend my ego or do whatever, act in a certain way, I now know. I now know. I don't always respond perfectly in the moment, but I know now that is just a cry from love in any kind of form. There's no difference. There's no degrees from the ego. And I can honestly say, I understand this now. This person is crying out for love. No matter how disgusting of a story my ego is making up about what they're doing, if I pause, I know. And it's been a remarkable journey to understand that. And a long journey, but it's just been a huge healing for me. Yeah, I love this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can have different vision, right? And when I'm experiencing that, and yeah, that's all. I think you know what I mean.
Yes, we do. No, that was beautiful. Thank you for testifying to that. That's after 3.5 years of doing A Course in Miracles versus.
I think it might be more. Oh, well, I don't know. Kim, are you on the call? I'm not.
20, 21, 22.
Yeah.
This is the 4th year. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's taken a while, but it's, I understand it.
Sure. So we'll simplify this. Is it comes down to when we react to another person, what are they doing? You have two choices. One is you can recognize that they're calling for love, or as it says here, you can assume that you have the right to interpret what's going on in that person's. We have to explore this a little deeper, friends. This is not this. We're looking at straight at the ego dynamic here. The ego wants to attack other people, and it wants you to enlist your mind as an ally in that attack. And so now we're exposing that bluff. David?
There is nothing to prevent you from recognizing all calls for help as exactly what they are, except your own imagined need to attack. It is only this that makes you willing to engage in endless battles with reality, in which you deny the reality of the need for healing by making it unreal. You would not do this except for your unwillingness to accept reality as it is, and which you therefore withhold from yourself.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's look at this from the ego's point of view. So these are rhetorical questions. Does the ego imagine it needs to attack? Is the ego willing to engage in endless battles with reality? Is the ego deny the need for healing? And is the ego unwilling to accept reality as it is? Yes. So it's a delusional system. And again, it has existed for a million years. The question comes down to, in your next opportunity, are you going to be baited into it and temporarily align the power of your mind and believing it to be real? Or are you going to be alert to that and put your no up? And so here's an example. Your own imagined need to attack, we need to pluck that from our mind. The ego's belief that you need to attack in order to protect yourself against the threats that others would provide, pluck that from your mind, and thus make it unreal in your thought system.
It is surely good advice to tell you not to judge what you do not understand. No one with a personal investment is a reliable witness, for truth to him has become what he wants it to be. If you are unwilling to perceive an appeal for help as what it is because you are unwilling to give help and to receive it. To fail to recognize a call for help is to refuse help. Would you maintain that you do not need it? Yet this is what you are maintaining when you refuse to recognize a brother's appeal, for only by answering his appeal can you be helped. Deny him your help, and you will not recognize God's answer to you. The Holy Spirit does not need your help in interpreting motivation, but you do need his.
Well, now we have what I would call an intermediate or advanced aspect of this phenomenon. So the first one is that you recognize they're either offering love or asking for love, and that you do not need to interpret any further than that. That's the first level. The second level is, now that they're asking for help, how do you respond to their request? And again, this is where it requires some healing and growing, because if you're unwilling to perceive their appeal for help as what it is, it's because of an obstacle in your own thinking. It's an unwillingness to give help. And I recognize this happens with me quite frequently. There's a call for help in whatever form it is. Many times a call for help is very subtle, and you really have to listen deeply for that this is really someone saying, I need you, I need help, because they don't use those words. And then my ego responds by feeling imposed upon. Oh, why are they asking me for help? I don't have blah, 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 blah. And then I have my own, the ego has its own narrative. It's an unwillingness to pursue it. So that is something that I would have you recognize, which we'll call it a refusal to recognize a brother's appeal. Not my words, a refusal. It's an internal, it's not to say that I'm not saying every time there's a call for help, you're the one to respond. What I am saying is that the ego has a predefined narrative which would refuse to be helpful. And therefore, if we unconsciously follow that ego narrative, here's the consequences. If you deny your brother help, then you will not recognize God's answers to you. Because the other person's looking for an answer. I need help. They may not know it consciously, but at some level, they need help. And if you persistently and habitually deny your brother's request for help, then that will result in an obstacle in your own mind where you'll not recognize God's answer to you. So in order to be free, we have to be free of these obstacles, and they can be very subtle. So there's a learning here that goes beyond hard and fast rules. And so we'll get into that another time perhaps, but this is the intermediate skill, is to learn to recognize when other people are hurting and calling for help. Susie?
You know, it's just so interesting how everything is in our minds, right? Because if somebody was lying on the ground, you know, and we were walking by, most of us would not fail to recognize that as a call for help.
Yes.
And so it's our minds that are so trained and programmed to not understand. And so now it's a good visual for me, like, oh, what is the difference really? It's just in my mind. So that just came up for me.
Yeah. It takes many forms. Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Johnny. In a situation like this, I have a question and a comment. The question is does love have to be absolute, or is everyone at any moment offering as much love as they are capable of at that moment? One of the principles of the Course in Miracles, one of the principles of miracles, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something to the effect of a miracle is the giving by someone who temporarily has more than enough.
Yes.
Someone who temporarily has less than enough. And I know that I've had situations where people have responded to me with love, and I just didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't them necessarily who needed the healing.
Right.
It was me who needed the healing. And if it's possible that people are actually offering as much love at that moment as they are capable of offering, then it seems incumbent on me to look for that little spark and realize that it's always me who needs that healing and that help. This person becomes, for the moment, my spiritual teacher who is showing me the way.
So true, Brian. I'm tracking with you totally, and that's so. So what you're illustrating is sometimes the tables are reversed. It's me that needs the love, and but I might be blocked in receiving it. And to your, I think it was your question about is love absolute. The Course says, yes, there's always love deep within us, but in time and space, we can block it or it can be unblocked. And the entire purpose of this course is not to add any love to our nature, because we already are love, but the entire purpose is to remove any blocks that might be there. And the blocks, unfortunately, are often things that we passively or unconsciously participate in, such as analyzing the motives of others. And that blocks us by putting us in a attack mode and putting us into a mode where we're actually arguing against reality. Kim?
So for me, it's important here to differentiate between what this says and what I might do. Because what I hear here is that it's really saying to just recognize. And so what I try to do is not take action quickly. In other words, I really just try to stay in a place of recognizing, then immediately going to the Holy Spirit to direct me on what action, if any, other than just praying and giving love, that I need to do. Because sometimes my impulse is to act before I hear from the Holy Spirit, and that never works out well. So I am seeing clear that this is about really just recognizing. And so for me, that's an important thing. Thank you.
It really is. I'll double underscore what Kim just said. We're not talking about automatic knee-jerk reactions in behavior. I need to get involved. It may be just so we say a silent prayer for the person. But what we don't do is go back and evaluate them as being sick and being any labels that you want to put on that. We don't make ourselves the judge of their reality. Holy Spirit's already evaluated everyone as being the Holy Son of God. What more can you add to other people than that? That's really part of the last judgment, is that you are the Holy Son of God. Period. Nothing more need be said. Okay, so recognizing that the ego would have you reject their appeal for help and pit your mind against the other person, not in a way that would join with the other person.
Only appreciation is an appropriate response to your brother. Gratitude is due him for both his loving thoughts and his appeals for help, for both are capable of bringing love into your awareness if you perceive them truly. And all your sense of strain comes from your attempts not to do just this. How simple, then, is God's plan for salvation? There is but one response to reality. for reality evokes no conflict at all. There is but one teacher of reality who understands what it is. He does not change his mind about reality because reality does not change. Although your interpretations of reality are meaningless in your divided state, his remain consistently true. He gives them to you because they are for you. Do not attempt to help a brother in your way, for you cannot help yourself. But hear his call for the help of God, and you will recognize your own need for the Father.
So this last few lines echo what Kim was saying is about avoiding any temptation to quickly rush in and fix it. Do not attempt to help a brother in the method and the ways of your own little mind, for you can't be, for when we do that, we're operating out of our littleness, and we can't even help ourselves in that mode. So this first half of this paragraph is more than just words. We said this is a simple course. It gives us a guidance for a new perceptual system that will carry you and I all the way to the gates of heaven. And it's easy to understand. In responding to another person, only appreciation and gratitude are consistent with the Holy Spirit's mind. Appreciation and gratitude, not evaluation, not analysis, not pity, or any other labels that involve judgment. And what I thought was amazing is to be grateful both for his loving thoughts, as Brian was talking about when another person's trying to love you. Yes, allow that to go in and feel grateful when another person is offering their help, their love to you, but also learn to be grateful for when another person appeals to you for help. This is the exact opposite of the ego that would reject their appeal for help. Now we're retranslating how we respond to appeal for help and being grateful, because all that brings love back into your awareness. The person's appealing to me for help. And after all, what is my function here? What is my role but to be helpful? And thus the entire scheme of Holy Spirit's program for healing, the atonement, is we're reminded of that when a person appeals for help. How simple then is God's plan for salvation? Every encounter acts as a reminder for God's plan for salvation. Now, we haven't said anything about your overt or outward response. We're really not addressing that head on today. We will be addressing it. But let me just, as a sidebar, real quickly say, there are Christ-initiated miracles, which is that person appeals to you for help, and out of the Christ mind comes an impulse, a direct guidance for what you can do in that moment to be helpful. But there are also what are called indiscriminate miracles, which would be somewhat like what Kim was referring to, where I decide by myself to rush in and fix it. That would be an indiscriminate miracle. Good can still come out of an indiscriminate miracle, but the Course tells us that whatever help you provide, it will not last. It's a temporary, it's only a temporary solution, whereas a Christ-guided miracle has permanent results. And so that's not the focus today, but we will get to that of when we are guided. As Kim said, what I really need to do is pray and ask, what would you have me do? That would be the appropriate prayer. Sandra?
So my experience with this is gratitude for being triggered. So I'm getting to a place where I'm really grateful whenever I get triggered, because it helps me to it's an opportunity for healing the past. A trigger is always from the past. And as much as it's not enjoyable to feel the trigger, I can be in a place of gratitude for the trigger and know that it's my opportunity to heal. And triggers build my relationship with my Holy Spirit and with myself. I'm complete.
Thank you. All right, we'll go on.
Your interpretations of your brother's needs are your interpretation of yours. By giving help, you are asking for it. And if you perceive but one need in yourself, you will be healed. For you will recognize God's answer as you want it to be. And if you want it in truth, it will be truly yours. Every appeal you answer in the name of Christ brings the remembrance of your Father closer to your awareness. For the sake of your need, then, hear every call for help as what it is, so God can answer you. By applying the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the reactions of others more and more consistently, you will gain an increasing awareness that His criteria are equally applicable to you. For to recognize fear is not enough to escape from it, although the recognition is necessary to demonstrate the need for escape. The Holy Spirit must still translate the fear into truth.
I'm amazed at this program and the depth of wisdom that is available to us here if we understand. So let's just talk about the second part of this, because this relates to a comment Susie made earlier, where she was referring to the passage in chapter 2 called Special Principles for Miracle Workers, that says forgiveness alone is a form of judgment, that healing comes about only with forgiveness and correction. Correction comes from the Holy Spirit. This is a distinction, honestly, not a lot of miracle students recognize this distinction. So if it puzzles you at first, I understand it puzzled me for many years. Here's another way of saying it. To recognize fear is not enough. Fear crosses into your mind, and all of a sudden, instead of being overwhelmed by it and believing it to be real, you recognize, oh, well, that's a fearful thought. I don't want to give power to it. That is not enough. That is necessary in order for you to move to the next stage, but it's not adequate for your healing. You need correction as well as recognition of the fear and to say no to it. What's needed is the Holy Spirit still must translate the fear into truth. This is the correction. Oh, I recognize that thought was fearful. I'm not going to give power to it, but what is the truth? Only Holy Spirit can correct. There's a sidebar, is that ego will attempt to correct. A sidebar, this would be like an intellectualism. All right, well, that's fearful, but I know what the correct truth is, and it says it right here on page 247, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that would be a mistake. Only the Holy Spirit is a source of the exact correction to the exact problem that appears right there in your mind. She knows the perfect, we're talking about God's answer, not the answer from your memory. And so we'll walk through it once again. An idea of fear crosses your mind, and there's a temptation to believe it completely. But instead of doing that, the miracle worker recognizes immediately that that's a fearful thought. No, I don't want to grab onto that and buy into it. That's the first half of healing is now been complete. I've recognized the fear and said no. Part two is, what is the truth? If that was a fearful thought, then what is it that should be understood? Where is the light in this moment? And of course, for that, we have to go to the source of light, which is the Holy Spirit. If you're familiar with the idea of necessary but not sufficient conditions, this may not be a language that everyone has understood, but necessary but not sufficient means it's an important step in the direction, but it's not adequate by itself. It's not sufficient for healing to occur. We must allow the Holy Spirit to shed her light into your mind in that moment for healing to occur. And so this distinction between recognizing the fear and then moving, after saying no to it, moving on to say, Holy Spirit, what is the truth? That will come about when, and Kim illustrated it, there's an appeal for help. I don't need to be afraid of this, but Holy Spirit, what would you have me do? You appeal to the Holy Spirit for instructions there. And many times it might come back is pray for the person. Recognize that your own healing looks a lot like their healing, that they're not so different than you. And in other times, you'll be guided by Christ to take direct action in that moment. That's a Christ-directed miracle is about to occur when that happens. Anything aside from a Christ-directed miracle is you and I intervening with our own best intentions. Noelle?
About 10 minutes before the class began, I had a plucking moment, and it had to do with an email I received from a client. I've been working on his work this afternoon and discovered what I thought was great confusion. So I spent time straightening it out and wrote to him about it. And he wrote back and said, oh, my committee and I decided X instead of Y, and I had never been informed. I was really angry because I thought I had spent so much time, lost time, thought I lost something. And I also felt left out. Why didn't he tell me? And I did what Kim is advising not to do. I took immediate action and wrote back and said, I wish I had known, lived self-righteously. And so I haven't looked at any response yet, but it has bothered me. And I recognize that my perception of him was erroneous, that he had made an offense. When really, as you've been saying, and these last paragraphs have been saying, he was asking for help nevertheless. The committee decided X, so now I do X. Fine, that's what I've agreed to do anyway. So I also, as you pointed out, I'm going to tell him how much I appreciate his work, and because he really puts himself fully into it with 3 feet, and what he's doing and how he sticks with it. So all of that has helped to loosen that ego hold I've had on the situation. But it's, it's not ironic, but it's divine order that this came up just as we're talking about the plucking situation.
Yeah, these things just keep happening. We read about it on the very same day it happens. And I've heard of dozens of testimonies. This just happened today. It's a wonderful applicability of the Course to our daily lives.
If you were left with the fear once you had recognized it, you would have taken a step away from reality, not towards it. Yet we have repeatedly emphasized the need to recognize fear and face it without disguise as a crucial step in the undoing of the ego. Consider how well the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the motives of others will serve you then. Having taught you to accept only loving thoughts in others and to regard everything else as an appeal for help, he has taught you that fear itself is an appeal for help. This is what recognizing fear really means. If you do not protect it, he will reinterpret it. That is the ultimate value in learning to perceive attack as a call for love. We have already learned that fear and attack are inevitably associated. If only attack produces fear, and if you see attack as the call for help that it is, the unreality of fear must dawn on you. For fear is a call for love, in unconscious recognition of what has been denied.
I told you that this section is amazing, and we're really getting into it here. So just real quick at the top, the reason I underscore this so much is because I spent for years caught in a trap of recognizing fear and then denying the fear and stopping at that point. I spent years. So when I finally realized that there was another vital step to heal that I was missing, it hit me like a brick. Here it says, if you are left with fear once you recognize it, you're actually stepping away from reality, not towards it. So I became very skillful at recognizing fear. Stop. A step away from reality, not towards it. We must then invite Holy Spirit's contribution to that moment and follow instructions from there. There is in this paragraph the bigger issue of becoming free from fear altogether. It's going to introduce it in the context of what we're talking about today when a person appeals to you for help. But this is a topic bigger than we have time for today, which is the reason why we're all here is to become free of fear altogether. But this application is at a deeper psychological level, is a part of how to become free from fear altogether, in that when a fearful person approaches you and says whatever they say, and you realize that you do not need to be afraid, but that this isn't a call for help, and that what's needed here is Holy Spirit guidance of how do I respond. What you're doing is recognizing fear is an appeal for help, and you're denying the power of fear to direct that encounter, that moment. You're not allowing yourself to get caught up in what could very easily be a situation where you too respond with fear. You're denying the reality of fear. So this is a bigger topic and is really weak. I'll make a broad universal statement. We cannot attain enduring peace until we have freed ourselves from fear. And so it's a necessity in the service of inner peace is to undo any illusions in our mind, any beliefs about fear having control and being real. So we will take this up again and again, but know that even in this situation we're talking about today, you're participating in the denial. You're denying that fear has power, and you're asserting the power of love instead. And that's what heals all mankind, is to deny the power of fear and assert the power of love. Julie? C? I'm sorry, Julie S.
No problem. Yeah, so the line that really hit me this time is if you do not protect it, if you do not protect that fear, Holy Spirit will reinterpret it. And what you have been really reinforcing and keep bringing up tonight is the fact that recognizing fear is important, and it's the first step. But then the action of correction is what we have to do, and I think that is what that protecting thing is all about, because I inadvertently protect it by not taking the action. I inadvertently keep it with me by just recognizing it and then not going to the correction. So I can't protect it. And it's like it's something that I do that I don't even really know I'm doing. You know, I'm protecting that fear. I'm holding it to me. And so that was a really good lesson for me tonight to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julie. Did you hear what Julie said? By recognizing the fear, but keeping it, I don't even recognize what I'm doing to myself. I'm storing away my fears in my mind. There's fear. Oh, there's a fear. And there's a fear. I'm storing the recognition of those fears away and keeping them. The Course teaches that when we perceive something, it becomes part of our perceptual system unless we clear it, unless we exchange it with the Holy Spirit. And so we do it unconsciously. We're innocent of this. We're not to blame, but we're also playing with fire. And as we read earlier tonight, it's hazardous to our well-being to do these things. And so we should use this many times. I use the metaphor of this journey and healing as taking steps forward into the light. What we just have been talking about is if you identify fear, but do nothing else with it, you could be taking a step away from reality, not towards it. So the steps work both ways. We've all recognized it, that can happen. And all the more reason for then knowing when it's time to pluck these things from our mind. Okay. Whoops. Did I go to? Okay.
Fear is a symptom of your own deep sense of loss. If when you perceive it in others, you learn to supply the loss, the basic cause of fear is removed. Thereby, you teach yourself that fear does not exist in you. The means for removing it is in yourself, and you have demonstrated this by giving it. Fear and love are the only emotions of which you are capable. One is false, for it was made out of denial, and denial depends on the belief in what is denied for its own existence. By interpreting fear correctly as a positive affirmation of the underlying belief it masks, you are undermining its perceived usefulness by rendering it useless. Defenses that do not work at all are automatically discarded. If you raise what fear conceals to clear-cut, unequivocal predominance, fear becomes meaningless. You have denied its power to conceal love, which was its only purpose. The veil that you have drawn across the face of love has disappeared.
Okay, so this is deep work here. We're not going to pretend otherwise. As it says, fear is a symptom of your own deep sense of loss. And we're going to come back and visit that again because it's very deep and most people are not conscious of it at all, although with this course it is brought out of the darkness and into the light. So the encounter we have with another person who's asking for help is really the tip of an iceberg that goes all the way down to your own deep sense of what is fear and things within your own mind that are deeply mistaken that cause us to perceive through the lens of fear. So let's simplify what was just said. There is a way of understanding fear according to the Holy Spirit. It's the reinterpretation of what fear is. there is a way of understanding fear that is not defined by the ego, but is defined by the teacher of how to heal. And that is that when a person is exuding fear, that is a ego device, a defense. You can think of it as a mask for hiding, a veil for concealing the depths of their own true being. Let me say it another way again. In truth, we were created by infinite love and are a reflection of the Creator's love. Fear is a veil that hides that and instead projects the opposite outward. Fear is a false mask, an unreality that pretends to be real, but is not. And the difference is, how will you respond to it next time you encounter it? And what the Holy Spirit would do is have you take a step forward, again, and then another step, and then another step to correctly interpret what fear is. So instead of responding to fear with your own fear, you respond with the understanding of the Holy Spirit. And thus, you have denied fear its power. You've taken your power back to change your own mind. You've asserted your own free will power to change your own mind, denied power to fear, and instead use your mind to extend love. That's what this whole course is about, is the denial of fear and the reassertion of what is already your true being, is the power of love to change the world. David W., you had your hand up?
Yeah, I had a good example of this tonight. I'm very hesitant to share in our group because I always think I get overwhelmed with emotion and excitement sometimes. So I think I'm going to not say it right. So after I shared tonight, I immediately went to, geez, you didn't say that right. And so I immediately was in fear that, oh my God, I didn't say that right. So I immediately turned to the Holy Spirit, and she said, that's just another fish. and I didn't realize that it's not about, she said, you have full confidence in your feelings and how to express yourself. It's just it's the fear that I'm not going to do it right that holds me from sharing. So that's a little miracle for me, because I turned to the Holy Spirit and asked her to reinterpret this fear for me.
Thank you, David. It's so practical that you're applying it right in real time, right as we go. That's the toolkit that we all need, is that we take the understanding we get from reading the course and then apply it consistently in our life to free us from those loops that otherwise we would be trapped in. Noel?
I have a question, line 2. If when you perceive the loss in others, you learn to supply the loss, does that mean replace the sense of loss with the conviction of love with a capital L?
Oh, I have to catch up with you. Let me read it from the sentence, top of the paragraph. Yeah, let me read it over so I get on the same line with you. Fear is a symptom of your own deep sense of loss. If when you perceive it in others, you learn to supply the loss, the basic cause of fear is removed. I missed it again. Help me out here for those of you that might see it. So the real issue is my own deep sense of loss. That's what needs to be addressed first, or I can't help anybody.
Okay.
If, when you perceive it in others that they are also masking their own sense of loss of love, that if, when you perceive it in others, you learn to supply the loss, the basic cause of fear is removed. Yes, I guess the phrasing, learn to supply the loss, you're learning to address the loss. You're learning to affirm that love is present, that fear is unreal. When you do that, the basic cause of fear is removed.
So supply love in place of loss.
Yes. Thank you. That's nice. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julie, thank you.
Yes, so the fear is a symptom of your own deep sense of loss. The way I kind of feel this is my deep sense of loss is that I'm disconnected from my source. I'm no longer, I'm separate from my source, and so I'm separate from love. So anytime I'm feeling fear, it's because of this great loss that I feel like I'm separate from, from God. And so when I perceive that fear in others, to know that they are also feeling that we can actually supply that for them by being that love that we were created by, and and all of that. So really, to know what that deep sense of loss is that person feels separated from God too. That person is feeling alone. That person is feeling separate. And so their actions are reflecting that, instead of their actions reflecting the fear that they were also made in and of. Is that, I just think that's the root, that to me, that's like the base root of it, is that, I feel like I'm separate from God.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm here on my own, and I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful, Julie. And I know this, that these can be a miracle in an instant. It can happen where there's a person, however they're behaving or acting, and then you recognize, oh, I know what it's like to feel that deep sense of loss. They're feeling that. And that's, now I know that that's not valid, that that's part of a mask, part of a veil of love, but I understand what they're going through because I've been there too. And therefore, we are qualified, therefore, we're the ideal candidate in that moment to be helpful, because we know exactly what the other person's going through. I know you're scared. I've been that way myself, but I want you to know that there's something more powerful going on here. Kim?
I think though, for me, the supplying the loss can only apply for myself, with myself. And then when my fear is removed, I'm able to clearly see and ask the Holy Spirit to guide me
Yes.
to assist or help others. In other words, I don't think I can supply the loss of love in someone else. I think the Holy Spirit is the only one that can do that.
True. We can be participants in that process, but she's the only one that understands every dimension and every aspect of it. I mean, which one of us can say what another person what needs to be plucked from somebody else's mind? Which one of us can judge that? But the Holy Spirit sees it and can understand. So she needs to be the orchestrator of this. We become willing participants in the process when we are guided to do so. Noel?
I recognize too that for me, their fear can be contagious. If I don't protect myself, if that's the right word,
Yes.
if I don't deny it, if I'm not vigilant,
Yes.
if I don't replace it with, again, as Kim was saying, the Holy Spirit. So I have to watch out for that too, because, thoughts are connected, and other people's feelings can be quite strong.
Mhm. Yes. Learning to not get hooked into the fear. So there's stages to this learning. What Noel was referring to has to be mastered first, is I don't get hooked into it. And the more and more where we consistently practice that, we're able to then be available to be helpful when called upon. All right, we have to wrap up here with the last paragraph.
If you would look upon love, which is the world's reality, how could you do better than to recognize in every defense against it the underlying appeal for it? And how could you better learn of its reality than by answering the appeal for it by giving it? The Holy Spirit's interpretation of fear does dispel it, for the awareness of truth cannot be denied. Thus does the Holy Spirit replace fear with love and translate error into truth. And thus will you learn of him how to replace your dream of separation with the fact of unity. For the separation is only the denial of union, and correctly interpreted, attests to your eternal knowledge that union is true.
So, what an amazing section. This was the introduction to chapter 12. We talked about many ideas today, several of which are just touched upon and then will be dealt with again and again, including our own deep sense of loss and our denial of fear, our overcoming our belief that fear is real. And all of these will be lovingly couched in terms of how we relate to others, how their fears can become our fears. But if we train our mind, then their fears no longer become our fears. We learn to recognize that that's a fearful thought, which is really an appeal for love. And then, so I think I want to leave you with this thought. So when a person approaches you and they're troubled, Brian referred to this, the Course says, when a person who's not in their right mind approaches someone who is more in their right mind, more at peace in that moment. Well, that's bound to happen to you again in the near future. And when that happens, Holy Spirit has a bigger plan involved that's not only about that person, but also about your own reactions to situations where fear is calling for a partner. And Holy Spirit views every situation as an opportunity for a healing and for a lesson. And what we need to do is be aligned enough with her program of healing so in that moment that's where our consciousness is. We can draw upon her guidance and these teachings. And so it's a wonderful, I'm sure we will all have that opportunity sometime in the near future. Whether or not we recognize it and are awake to Holy Spirit's point of view is a question I'll leave to you to decide. But the opportunity is there, and whether we respond to it with love in that moment or not, what is for sure is it'll come around again and again until we learn our lessons, because that's what time is for, is to keep repeating these lessons until they are learned. So that's all that we have time for tonight. That was so powerful. One last thought. These materials that we've been reading are so strong. I almost feel like reading them again the next week. These are like gems of spiritual insight. And so I'm grateful that we can get together in this context here, and that you're interested in being on this journey and learning from the Holy Spirit as teacher. So I want to honor you for every step that you take along this journey, and say to you that the divinity within you shines light onto this world. Namaste.
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 Good night, everybody.
Beautiful, John.
Thank you, Yannick. How beautiful.
Hey, David W., are you still there?
Thank you, everyone.
David W.?